morning, everybody, and welcome to your Thursday edition of FreightWaves Now. I'm Kaylee Nix here with Michael Vincent.
Thank you, Kaylee. Welcome, everybody. We have Thomas Watson who will join us for a look at this week's Loaded and Rolling, plus Kevin Hill and Tony Mulvey have your spot market updates with On the Spot. But our top story of the day takes us to Washington, D.C., where the Biden administration is calling for suspension of federal gas taxes at the pump. John Gallagher, joins us now to talk about the feasibility of this plan. John, are we talking about a viable option? What are your thoughts here?
I was talking to earlier, actually, not yesterday, but the day before, in anticipation of this, I was talking to one guy. He's pretty plugged in Congress on transportation issues, and he was saying that something like this could pass the House pretty easily. The Senate, maybe not so much, but then yesterday after Biden actually announced this. You had the chair of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Peter DeFazio, not opposing it outright, saying that it would blow this, $10 billion hole into the Highway Trust Fund. Mm-hmm. And that we should be, instead from the Democratic side, we should instead be, looking at these big oil profits and, taxing those profits and passing, taxing them higher and passing those down to consumers instead of this. And as much, I don't know, how much, the rest of the Congress takes its cue from House Transportation and Infrastructure, but that doesn't send a very good precedent. And, Nancy Pelosi, if this were to, go through as a legislation, it would have to go through pretty quick. Nancy Pelosi is the one that kind of decides on what gets taken to the floor for a vote. And from what I understand, she, like earlier in the year, there was a couple of bills, similar bills that calling for a gas tax holiday. One was in the Senate, one in the House. And she didn't support those at all. And I think she even commented sort of negatively when she was asked about it. So, I mean, even from that perspective, it's I don't know. There seems to be some pushback now. I guess we're gonna find out, like in the next couple of days. That she was supposed to meet, I think, with members of her caucus or whatever, and talk about it. So I guess we'll see what happens. But it went pretty. It didn't get a huge support, at least initially. It sounds like.
So, John, we live, of course, right here along the Georgia-Tennessee border here in Freight Alley, and Georgia's had their state gas tax suspended now for about 3.5 months, since the middle of March when Governor Kemp decided to make that suspension of the state tax. And for a little bit, you would drive across the Georgia border, you'd find gas about 45 cents cheaper than you would here in Tennessee. And then you saw the retailers start to kind of compensate for that loss in the tax by bumping their prices back up and getting it closer back. So at least on the border, that market value was kind of the same, right? There wasn't a huge difference between Tennessee and Georgia, even with this state tax exemption. Is that something that you saw as a viable option? Like, did it work in Georgia, and now is that something that could be adopted at the other state level, or is it going to have to wait until it's a federal adoption?
Well, I understand Biden's also calling for the state. That was the other part of his remarks yesterday. It was like 15 minutes where he's talking about, not just the federal, but the states have to help here too. And he was looking at the numbers. He was looking at, I guess, the average state gas, the tax in the states was about 30 cents a gallon, which is much higher than the 18 cent and 24 cent for gas and diesel. In terms of like the states, it's weird because I've seen both sides, for and against, are pushing studies that show that these things work on the state level. There's a group called the American Road and Transportation Builders Association. They did a study last October. They took one of the states that was there, and apparently there's like 24 different states, including Georgia, as you mentioned, and New Jersey and New York, and that have either over the last year have either looked to do their own state gas tax holiday or something similar to that to give relief. And ARTBA, this group, looked at New Jersey's law that they put in place last year. So they looked at October. So they saw that I guess it was October 1st that New Jersey decreased their tax rate from they reduced it by 8.3 cents per gallon on October 1st. So apparently, in that case, the per gallon price of gas, even after they did that, it stayed constant for 3 days, and then it began to actually increase because with the rising crude oil prices. So by the end of October, New Jersey motorists were paying 7% more for gasoline. So basically, the conclusion there is that it's not that these gas taxes really aren't. I mean, it's the price of crude oil and not taxes that are the driver of change in terms of the retail price that people pay at the pump. So, and then the problem is, even if, as has been all over the news, even if you do that, there's no guarantee, there's no law that says they have to, even if you put in a law that suspends it, there's no law that says these producers and the wholesalers have to pass it down to the consumers. So, but just real quick on your point, Kayleigh. So Jennifer Granholm yesterday, who's the energy secretary, after Biden gave his speech, she got on and talked to reporters about another study that came out a week or so ago, showing that it does work in some states. That actually people are paying like 80% less. So I mean, and that figures too. You're going to have this back and forth on whose study is right, but it doesn't look like the states. And I know you mentioned Georgia, but I mean, it's no guarantee that if you put a gas tax in, will the producers and the wholesalers will it either come down as a reduction or go up? I mean, it seems to not have an effect. The tax itself doesn't have an effect. It's more the price of crude, a barrel of crude.
It really is, John. I mean, I'm not sure why they spent money on a study. I mean, taxes don't go up and down very much, so that's not really the fluctuation. It's the feeling of investors on the supply and demand for that crude oil that changes the futures market, et cetera, then changes the price and causes those fluctuations. Lower the price right now, demand is theoretically going down a little bit because it's incredibly expensive. People are trying not to buy as much gas as before, or just simply can't. Make it more affordable, they will, and therefore demand goes up and the price of crude goes up. And what's the end goal here? I don't understand how, and maybe I'm just ignorant, but how does a Band-Aid for a few months fix the problem? Shouldn't we be looking at not being oil dependent as much and what the problem was that caused this? I mean, I know it was the sudden export to Europe because of, and things are kind of evening out a little bit with the Russian oil and the whole conflict there, or the war in Ukraine. But there's also an underlying infrastructure that caused that to be able to have this huge effect on us. I mean, lowering the taxes for 3 months doesn't solve any of that.
Doesn't seem like it. No, I mean, the benefit is maybe you get I don't know. It's a political thing. As you know, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know. This is just it seems like a political thing. He wants to do this for 3 months over the summer, try to give motorists a little bit of relief, hopefully. But what's curious about that is, when I was talking to a guy the other day, he was like, well, this would likely be something at least to take you through the November elections, but it doesn't even do. Yeah, it doesn't even do that though. So I don't know. So the other thing I heard is that they, if you can't get Congress to get this legislation, they're also looking at some sort of potentially like emergency power to look at the supply chain, like what's keeping the refiners from refining more gasoline, because that seems to be a big area of where we're having this problem is the actual refining of it. Is there a supply chain? Granholm was saying, is there a chink in the supply chain that we can look at? We can use our emergency powers to maybe do whatever that might be to loosen things up, sort of like they did last year with the whole port supply chain. Find something there. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, I guess, in the next few days. He wants to do this before July 4th.
Yeah.
I think.
Regardless of our opinions, something will happen in the next 3 days.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll be speaking to talk about it.
Yeah.
All right, John, thank you for joining us today. Great to have you as always, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, John. Always a pleasure.
All right, we're going to head over to the wall right now. We've got our first carrier update of the morning with Tony Mulvey and Donnie Gilbert.